welcome to week 8. So, grading continues, and I feel as though I will be victorious in conquering it this week. All right, now, this week we're doing Module 5, Lesson 12. Built into Lesson 12 is your final draft of your research, but that is not due until August 2nd. It is my intention that you spend week 10 doing your final research draft. So, bear that in mind. It's there if you want to get it out of the way, if you're taking more than one summer class, however that works for your schedule. Maybe you're going to be out of town, whatever it is, it's there, it's open, you can turn it in. But my intention is that is our week 10. So bear that in mind. Then, okay, this week, lesson 12, you're looking at the Cold War. So the Cold War is a fascinating study, and I hope that you will do the reading. So really remember, in World War II, the United States and the USSR, they are allies because they have a common enemy, Germany. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, at least temporarily. And so that's how it worked out. Right after World War II ends, we see the Berlin airlift. So after World War II ends, Berlin was sort of divided up. There was a Soviet zone, there was a United States zone, there was a British zone. So the Soviets decided that the others were conspiring against them. They wanted to tell them how to run things in their zone, and that is never popular. From the time we are 2 years old and we can articulate our wants and desires, we do not enjoy being told what to do. Nobody does. So it just really rubbed against the grain of human nature. And so we have this really combative environment with the Cold War. We have the United States with an idea of capitalism where the means of production are privately owned. That incentivizes the producers. You want to be efficient. You want to do things to a standard of excellence because that's where your profit margin is. We have the system of communism in the USSR. That is, the means of production are state-owned, so like state-owned farms. And we see sometimes some trade-offs, especially in the 80s, trade-offs where the Russian or the USSR diverts more into defense and military, less into agriculture. But agriculture is not privately owned, it's state-owned. And so we're not seeing that food production. There's some starvation, there's some problems. So it's really a great experiment played out before our eyes in history, capitalism versus communism. Communism sounds great. The state's going to own everything. The state's going to be responsible for everything. They're going to feed me, clothe me, provide for my medical care, whatever. Capitalism, I'm going to have to work my tail off, but I'm going to get somewhere and I'm going to own something. We see though, in the United States, we've never been hungry. We are fed. And that is because our farmers, who by the way are less than 2% of the population, they are out working all the time until the job is done because that's their bottom line. That's how they provide for their families. And the better they do it, the better for themselves and the better for everybody they feed. And when the war in Ukraine, when Russia invaded Ukraine, in I think 2020 or 2021, whenever it was, immediately the hay market or the wheat market just skyrocketed. I live on a working farm and ranch, and so we live and die by these markets. So as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, the wheat market skyrockets because Ukraine is a huge wheat producer, and they produce for many countries in the Middle East and many places. And so there was going to be a shortage. And so the market responds with a higher price. We, as advanced as we are, we have to eat. And we have seen, history has shown, when our means of production are privately owned, there's an incentive to produce your most, do your best. When you're working for someone else that's state-owned, that incentive is gone. So this is a really important study for all of us. And so take it seriously. All right. So the Cold War kicks off with the Berlin airlift. That's what the United States and Britain they call it Operation Vittles. They're airlifting supplies to everybody who's blockaded. Medication, food, water, fuel, everything that they needed. It went through a winter. It was a tremendous effort by the United States and Britain. Really an example of no man left behind. Then we have sort of shadow proxy wars, especially in Vietnam. It's thought that the USSR and China were helping North Vietnam, a fellow communist nation. And we're fighting against, we are helping South Vietnam, a democratic nation, because President Truman had his policy of containment of communism. So when a democratic nation was in danger of falling, we would go to bolster them. Oh, there's a fly in here. Then we so many things, but one of the most important. So President Truman had a policy of containment of communism. In 1953, President Truman leaves the office and President Eisenhower comes in. And he had this domino theory of communism, that if your neighbor became a communist nation, then you were immediately at risk of becoming, because we become like the people we're around. That's just true. If you don't like how your life is, you need to evaluate your friend circle, because we definitely become like the people we're around. So President Eisenhower's CIA comes up with this great plan that they will take these 1,400 Cuban nationals, because they know the topography, the culture, and we're going to invade Cuba. So, because Cuba is a communist nation, it's our neighbor. And so they come up with this plan. It's a huge debacle. The plan was originated by Eisenhower's CIA, but President John F. Kennedy was elected in the 1960 election, sworn in January 1961, and then by April, so 2.5 months into his presidency, we have the Bay of Pigs. And that's when these Cuban nationals are going to storm the beaches of Cuba and take their country back, essentially. They're waging a rebellion. Well, Cuba knew all about it. They were expecting them. They were captured. It was just a horrible, horrible debacle. And so we see then the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I always wonder if we would have had the Cuban Missile Crisis if we had not had the Bay of Pigs. So in April 1961, Bay of Pigs. By the fall of 1962, Khrushchev, who was the premier in the USSR, told Castro, hey, I know how to keep those people off your shores. Let's put some nukes there and aim them at them. And that's what they did. And so, but it was an opportunity for President Kennedy. So again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Cuba and the USSR had a common enemy, the United States. So we see that playing out always. But the Cuban Missile Crisis was a great opportunity for President Kennedy to flex some foreign policy muscles, and he negotiated privately with Khrushchev. They came to a wonderful agreement, and the nukes went away from the Cuban shores pointed at us. So there's so much in the Cold War. But what I want you to understand is how it started out. It was just a war of ideas, capitalism versus communism. That's how powerful ideas are. And we see that with social media, these influencers. So be careful what you're consuming. Anyway, do the reading, participate in content discussion 11, the origins of the Cold War. And then you can definitely start working on your final draft. I will be grading. Reach out to me. If you need an immediate answer, please text me. As we have seen, I am horrible with the messaging and email, especially in the summer. All right, have a great week.